Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Build America, the national podcast that's capturing and sharing the very heartbeat of construction. I'm your host, Kerry Smith, owner of Construction News and Review, or CNR Magazine. If you're intrigued like I am about indoor agriculture, you are in for a treat today. We have two guests with us. Our guests in this episode are Ron Jones and Ron Mitchell with Clayco. Ron Jones is vice president of Clayco's industrial group, and in that role, Ron Jones defines groundbreaking methodologies for delivering capital projects to clients in the indoor grow and greenhouse space. Ron Mitchell is a master grower, an expert in aeroponics and hydroponics at Clayco. Gentlemen, welcome to this episode of Build America. It's great to have you here.
Thanks. Glad to be here,
Thank
Kerry.
Let's start by maybe explaining to all of us as your viewers and listeners what the unique qualities of indoor agriculture are versus what a lot of us are more familiar with would just be traditional outdoor agriculture. And Ron Mitchell, you might want to start. You had a great differentiator before we got on the air. Tell us the biggest difference you see.
I usually explain it to my friends that normally when you think of agriculture, it's grown outdoors. And you're up against Mother Nature there. You can control the water and you can control certain things. Not all the water, because you get the rain and all that sort of thing. But you have some control that you have to grow things. A lot goes wrong because of it, and their production usually suffers from it. Whereas when you move things indoors, you actually have to become Mother Nature, because that's what you're really up against. In a greenhouse, it's you can use the sunlight, which is nice, but it's sometimes too hot and too strong in a greenhouse. So you have to dampen it. You got to jump through all these hoops to get the right light and the right heat. But indoors, you have a full control, or that you should. That's the idea. And that's what we build, is full control into our buildings. So you're controlling the humidity, the heat, the oxygen in the air, the CO2 in the air, everything that a plant needs to flourish. We have to build into the building in order to be successful. Otherwise, things can really go wrong, as you can imagine.
That was a great explanation. I know the last time I had the pleasure of interviewing you, Ron Jones, you had mentioned the value of these crops. And if your humidity or temperature is off by half a degree or some sort, that could be it for that entire crop. What is it? Just a really big dollar industry. Give us an idea maybe of what we're talking about in terms of assets that you have to bring to fruition.
Yeah, they are very complicated facilities, and that makes them, especially in today's environment, expensive to build from a CapEx perspective, but they are also relatively expensive to operate. And at the end of the day, you're growing a food product that historically has relatively low margins. That puts a lot of pressure on the owners to make sure they're not only as efficient as they can be with the dollars they spend, but that their operations are giving them the output and the quality product that they need at the end of the day to pay those bills and make a profit.
Let's talk a little bit about the types of crops or the range of crops that agriculture that we're even speaking of, just because I know that's a question I had in preparing. Give us an idea of all the things you could be growing.
Yeah, there's so much you can do. Anything that can be sold or eaten, or, well, there's pharmaceuticals even that we grow in a controlled environment. We can grow fish, we can grow insects, we can grow all kinds of things. And the biggest advantage being a grower is that you can grow all year, every day. And that's unusual. And you can control all these things about how you grow it. So you can produce a really different looking produce that's really crunchy, and you can really dial in what you want the product to look like and feel like and taste like, and all that stuff we actually have control over. Of course, if you don't have the right grower, it can be out of control. But the idea is that you have these controls. It's like a fast car. If you can drive it, it's great. If you can't, look out.
When you talk about, as you were speaking, I wonder if the term organic, is that relevant in indoor agriculture?
It is, but losing more of its appeal, and because now we're growing things without pesticides of any kind, not organic pesticide, nothing, and it's more pristine, and you can run into a lot of things in the field that are organic, like animals roam through and do their thing and they pass disease. And so there are some diseases in organics. I had a certified organic indoor farm, and because it was good to have that label on there. And it is I buy organic produce because I'm more assured that there's not going to be anything on the leaves of the lettuce and all that than field grown. You have a lot of things you're trying to keep away from those plants when you're field grown: bugs, bacteria, all kinds of things. Too numerous to go into. That's big advantage again of indoor. I used to call it protected agriculture because that's what you're doing.
It's really interesting that instead of pesticides, they do incorporate beneficial plants and insects into the grow area to help perform some of those functions. But like Ron was saying, you don't need the chemicals. And so the term organic loses some of its luster.
Yeah.
Exactly. When you speak of Clayco and this whole division that specializes in these projects, give us an idea of the aeroponics versus the hydroponics? Is there one particular trend in the industry where you're designing more of one or the other, or do some facilities have both, or how does it shake out in terms of your clients?
There's so many different varieties that work that are grown under different systems. And just the quick answer to that, I'll try to be quick, is I've done both, and where hydroponics is simpler to do in a lot of ways. You have a little less control, but that's okay. Beautiful stuff is grown hydroponically. There's more controls in aeroponics, but there's more that can go wrong because you're using a high pressure volume of water, and that quits, well, your crop dies. You have to have things much more technical. And where the aeroponics comes in is in pharmaceuticals. They do a lot of work with pharmaceuticals, growing and testing for bacterias and different human diseases in plants themselves. And so that works best, under my experience, under aeroponics, because you can control that. You can take a plant out, infuse it with a disease, put it back in. You can do a lot more with the plant. So that's what they do.
This is stepping into Ron's area a little bit, but doesn't it too have one of the determining factors is actually what you're growing. From a plant standpoint, I always think of things on the indoor grows in three areas. You have berries, vine crops like tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, that sort of thing, and then leafy greens. And Ron, aren't some of those more grow better under one of the systems as opposed to the other? Or?
Aeroponics is really much more expensive to operate. And so you're high yield, you have this fancy berry or whatever that you're growing, more can go wrong with that. That's where aeroponics comes in. Most of the leafy greens is grown with hydroponics because it's simple and you can count on it, and it's less expensive to produce. So that's definitely, there's a difference there. That's why aeroponics is kept for like pharmaceuticals and expensive herbs, that kind of thing.
Let's talk about some of the specialty mechanical systems. I cannot even imagine how to ask that question of how complex with aeroponics and hydroponics these systems are and who engineers them. Does Clayco have its own team? Do you have other people who specialize specifically only in that? Tell me a little bit about that part of it.
It's a combination of both, Carrie, and you're exactly right. The level of complexity of these systems is really remarkable. The lighting, the various shades of light and wavelengths that are used for various stages of growth and types of plants. The HVAC systems are critical and particularly difficult to design in a vertical grow because you have all of these layers, but you're trying to get exactly the same airflow, humidity, CO2 at the plant surface all across those layers and beds, so both horizontally and vertically. I think one of the biggest technical challenges is that HVAC side, right? Because the water you can mix up and get your right recipe with the fertilizer and nutrients from that standpoint, deliver it in a pretty consistent manner. The lighting once, I think, and again, Ron, jump in because I don't
No, you're
you know,
exactly
You're
from a
right.
doing
growth
great.
standpoint, but the lighting, I think, is
Yeah.
relatively easy to define. But that
Yep.
HVAC is just an enormous variable because you're talking about airflow basically and trying to make it the same across all these different vertical and horizontal space while the plants are growing in between it.
Right. And the plants are
Right.
using up this stuff that then how much do you replenish? And it gets complex, but there's people out there trying to solve these problems. A lot of times I should point out that some people that come to us to build these intricate buildings know what they want, how they want to do it. They're coming with some technical information of they've got growers and engineers that have said, look, this is what we got to have. This is the temperature we got to have, all those things. So we can hit those set points with the way we build the building, and there's all kinds of things you can do to keep insects out of the building. That's a skill we have. And so we merge together with their idea. And it's exciting actually working with them because they come up with these really good ideas in the R&D stage. And then we got to put it in
knowledge and expertise that comes from the owner. We have in-house resources, and then we'll partner with experts in specific areas and put that whole team together to attack the problem rather than just trying to guess at it.
When you were speaking of that and the verticals and the challenges about the airflow, that's what I wondered, and I'm sure depending on the crop or the owner, it's all completely different. But I wondered if we would go out and visit one of these facilities, would we see more of a vertical footprint, or would we see like a warehouse distribution kind of footprint with a couple of stories and a big acre parcel, or what works best? Or again, is it going to be depending on what you're growing?
Yeah, it depends a lot on what you're growing and the technology that the owner is bringing to the table. Ron mentioned earlier the greenhouses, and that's a large, fairly well-proven technology or grow method. But then once you get in, and fairly standardized in terms of the building and what have you from that perspective, but the indoor grows can take on multiple configurations depending on, obviously, not only what they're growing, but how they're growing it and the technology that the owner's utilizing. Some have more vertical layers than others, that type of thing. But so you see quite a bit of variance. And again, that side of it's a relatively young industry. And so there's still a lot of experimentation going on, people trying to figure out what works best. From that standpoint. And so we see everything from a box in a box where the grow area is put in a box inside of an existing building to others where the building and the grow structure itself is actually all in one, like an ASRS kind of a warehouse configuration. So you really do see a little bit of everything.
Yeah, and a lot of them are very secretive because they spend a lot of money to get to that stage. And then a couple of years from now, they'll be showing it to everybody. The technology is moving pretty rapidly.
And that's a great point too, Ron, about this business that's a little bit unique because it is new, because not everybody, because a lot of people are bringing in their own new technologies. There's not the level of standardization that you see in more mature industries. And as a result, so far, there's not the level of cooperation and collaboration that you see in chemicals or pharmaceuticals or some of those industries that are still very competitive, but they've matured to a point where people are willing to help the industry out to grow and prosper.
We belong to a group, international group called Farm Tech Society that has major players in the field of growing. And we're part of this to open this up a little bit, share some of the ideas so that people could get started in it and they don't have to know all the secrets, but they can develop their own from there. Anyway, we're trying to build the industry is what I'm getting at.
That's wonderful. As you were talking about the level of proprietariness, I don't think that's a word, but close to that, the security systems, I would imagine, in these facilities are, again, I don't know if they're different depending on the crop or the value, but security and also like insurance, I wondered about those two components that makes it different than your average build.
Yeah, security, I think on two levels. One, the physical security of, like Ron alluded to earlier, keeping the pests and the diseases out. So there's a level of food safety and biological safety that has to be considered to maintain the integrity of those areas. But the other part of that security piece goes back to the IP that the companies have and the data they collect during the grow cycle. It's absolutely incredible with today's technology, the information they can get about really each plant and how it's going through its life cycle and all the various things they can measure and look at. And that creates volumes of data that also have to be secured, right? So there's a couple of different levels there with that question.
Yeah. That's true.
As you're speaking in the general construction workforce, how everyone says it's still very tight in terms of labor. And I'm wondering what the associate degrees or collegiate degrees or other things that the skills that people need to have to operate these facilities once you turn them over. I just can't even imagine who you're looking for, who the owner is looking for to do this.
You can go to school for some of it. And I know some great schools that teach biology and and all the different things that it would become in handy. But it really gets down to mentorship with a mentoring. I always recommend go find somebody that knows how to do this and mentor under that person because it's years and years of experience. It took me a long time. I've been in this over 40 years and
Wow.
I built farms and done all kinds of things. And I had mentors all the way along and they made it go a lot quicker to get to where I had to go, which was to get more production and at a bigger level and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, you're really being a biologist, but then you're also being an engineer too. So at the same time, you got to
Yeah, I
go
mean,
out.
these facilities cover the whole gamut, right? It's the growing side, the farmer side, if you will, on one end, and the folks that harvest the product and what have you. But then it very quickly moves into the post-harvest processing, which is a food safe environment and really like a food factory. And so you have this whole
Yeah.
range of people that are required in these facilities that say starts on the grow end and a lot of that mentoring and hands-on experience that Ron is talking about. And then as you get into the post-harvest areas, it's more traditional food processing. So people
Yeah.
with mechanical, electrical, engineering backgrounds to deal with that complex machinery and equipment that's used to process, package, store the product, as well as all the support utility systems and everything. So you have maintenance engineers and folks like that. And Ron mentioned earlier, all the way back on the research side, then you have research scientists. So it's an industry that really does encompass a very wide range of skills. You got the IT people that have to handle all that data
Oh, yeah.
and
Yeah, that's right.
infrastructure and information. It's complex in that regard.
Yeah, there's room for everybody in this industry.
Yeah.
Ron Mitchell, not to make you feel mature in any way, but has indoor agriculture been around for how long? 40, 50 more longer years? Or you said you had gotten into it a good while back, and that made me want to ask.
I wasn't around for this, but the gardens in Babylon were hydroponic. Okay, so it goes back a ways. It's been in the desert for all those years and matured, and it has quite a history. But I got involved when hydroponics was big in the UC Berkeley, and I learned from the professor there and fell in love with it. And that's the other thing. There's room for people in this industry that are in love with what they do. Ron was saying there's all these facets that are involved in this business, and I always tell everybody, do what you love and learn how to do it.
You had to be one of the kind of earlier adopters in the
Yeah.
indoor grow world. I mean, greenhouses have been around more than that, probably 100,
Yeah.
150 years, something maybe. But this indoor grow, Ron's a pioneer in that area, brings all that
Yeah.
experience to the table.
Yeah, so I started when I started in my 20s, excuse me, my early 20s. I just wanted to, and I found a guy, this was the professor in Berkeley. I wanted to grow indoors, and he had a great big greenhouse, and I was right down the road from where I lived. So I started working there, and I realized, oh, this is fantastic.
Oh,
I learned all about it for 4 or 5 years. I think it was there 5 years, and decided to branch out on my own. And I went to Hawaii to grow in a greenhouse, and I realized, oh no, you can't grow in the greenhouse because it's too humid in Hawaii. There's too many bugs. There's too much of everything. So I went indoors and built a warehouse, and that's where and this was in in the 90s. Yeah.
that's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
And what a passion. What a wonderful mentorship story, too. That's great.
Yeah.
In terms of where in the country, I don't know if Clayco is designing building these globally or mainly in certain pockets of the country. I know we're talking about a big spectrum of different crops and grows,
Mhm.
but where do you guys, what part of the country are you, would we most often see you?
As a company, we work nationwide. And so our customers in this and other markets are primarily within the continental United States. We do go to Mexico and Canada a bit. But within the US, there are areas that are probably more favorable than others, depending on whether it's greenhouse. Indoor vertical grow isn't as location dependent, except for the utility costs. right? So if you get in an area that's cold all year round, you spend a lot on heat, or if you're in a desert, you spend a lot on cooling. So there's a balance there. But it seems like most of the people that we deal with in this industry are more interested in the kind of the logistics side of it. And so they want to be close to urban areas within a day's travel or less with their product, so it can be on the shelf and in the customer's refrigerator as quickly as possible. So I think we probably see that being more of a driver than north, south, east, west thing.
Yeah,
Sure,
because
that makes
that's the big advantage. We can do it on the North Pole. We could do it in the desert, anywhere. It's really a big advantage. And really, why not put it where we need to have it consumed?
Yeah, and
exactly.
globally, the folks in the Middle East, the Emirates in particular,
Yeah.
are investing heavily in indoor vertical grow just because they can't grow it outside there, and greenhouses don't work. And it's been a big push the last few years there in the middle of the desert, Middle East.
Right.
I could talk to you guys all day, but I'm going to wrap it up with one last question about renewable sources of energy. And I wonder if things like green hydrogen or other low emissions forward sources, if that impacts what you do or not so much.
Yeah, we haven't really seen hydrogen yet. Obviously, just by the nature of this industry, there's a very heavy focus on sustainability and environmental conservation. And so you typically do see some level of solar on a lot of facilities.
Yeah.
Water reclamation is absolutely a necessity in all of these type of operations. But what we're starting to see as an evolving trend is co-location, where these facilities can utilize waste heat off of another operation. For example, data centers put out a lot of heat, and that can be captured and used in these grow facilities to the benefit of everyone and the environment as well.
That's fascinating. We have been talking with Ron Mitchell, a master grower and an aeroponics and hydroponics expert, and with Ron Jones, vice president of Clayco's Industrial Group. And gentlemen, it's been such a pleasure to learn from you today. I think this is probably going to be one of the least familiar topics and the most interesting that we've tackled yet on Build America. But thank you so much for being with us, and I hope you'll both come back on again soon.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity. Yes, we certainly will.
We'd love to, Carrie. Like, we could talk about this all day long.
That's great. I could listen to it all day long. Hey, thanks for listening, everybody.
To it.